Can I help you?
Yeah, I'm Jerry Fitzgerald. Just wanted to wish her a happy holiday. It's Christmas Eve, and we've got this thing going on with my father and my whole family that is going to need to be addressed tonight.
Yeah, so you're gonna need a drink.
There's something I just want to discuss with the whole family. It's about Dad.
What about Dad?
He wants to spend Christmas with us here at the house.
All I want to be is with my family at Christmas. Is that so unreasonable?
No, that's definitely not happening.
I just had somebody on about this new website, which is like a crowdsourcing, like Kickstarter, but from soup to nuts. They do everything, and it's specific for films,
What is it
independent
called?
films. Seed and Spark.
So I know Caitlin Fitzgerald, who was in Newlyweds. Her film that she directed
Yes.
up in Maine was the very first film. The woman that started Seed and
Emily.
Spark. I believe they're the ones that started it, and it's sort of not just asking for money from folks, but
No.
it's sort of like, all right, we need a 62 GTO in this scene.
Yes.
Does anybody have that? We need
Right.
a bar that's going to be open and packed
Yes.
with people for a New Year's Eve party, and you
Right.
put that out.
It's like a
there.
registry slash, I don't know, swap meet slash what have you, where
I think
you can.
it's a great idea because I think what you're seeing is people love movies. People love behind the scenes footage. People love to be an extra in a movie.
Mm-hmm.
And now what's happened on the indie scene is you're actually allowing people to really participate in the process. I think like Kevin Smith years ago did something where he put a bunch of people in the credits on a DVD that I know was very popular with his fans. And I think this is sort of, an extension of that. Like the fact that, hey, I get to contribute a couple of bucks to help this guy that I like, or I read his pitch, and I am somehow a part of the filmmaking process, and you
Right.
can
And it's community building.
community building. And I think people love to claim ownership over that stuff. It's why, for years, rock bands and their fan clubs have been so successful. You want to, hey, that's my team. I was in early.
Yeah, and you give them the first cut of tickets, or so they think.
Yeah. Oh, you do get,
No, I'm
I've
teasing.
I've gone on
Yeah.
to, because we're thinking about doing a Kickstarter campaign for my next project, which speaks to the changing
Working-
landscape of how these movies are made and distributed. But looking at the different packages, they're all different, and it seems people are kind of up for all of it.
And the other side of it, which I'm noticing, is the connecting the community with the film, with the project, because there's so many films that are just don't have the budget for the marketing and advertising. So how do they get to,
Well,
how do they get any level of visibility?
Ted Hope, who is sort of, one of the great indie producers in New York and now runs the San Francisco Film Festival. Good buddy of mine produced McMullen, and She's the One. He's the guy that got me to start a Twitter account. And back then, he said, the key now for indie filmmakers is you have to have a real meaningful interaction and meaningful interaction with your audience. And you can do that through Twitter. And if you can get 500 or 5,000 true fans to fight the good fight for you, that's going to help in the marketing of your film down the road. And he was absolutely right about that. And the other thing that he's now started to talk about is long before you go into production, you cannot wait until the film is done to then try and engage. You need to try and build an audience while you're writing the screenplay. And whether it's now through things like Kickstarter or what's the other one?
Seed and Spark.
Seed and Spark.
I
And a
should
number
get- I
of
should
people
get
have
some
written
Spark
about
film.
this now, that you have to get them in early so that long before you start shooting the film, you've got an audience built in. It can't be a large audience if you're an unknown filmmaker, but you've got to also start thinking about that.
How did you do that with the Fitzgerald Family Christmas?
The very first thing I did was getting out very early on in the writing process and letting my Twitter followers and Facebook fans know that I think I've got this new idea, and I'm going to be returning to sort of the Irish-American working class milieu of the first couple of films. And as I sort of started to write the script, it's something I did with Newlyweds. I asked them, to help me name a handful of the characters. We did a contest, and they came up with the name Nora that Connie Britton eventually played. Then as I started to bring back cast members from my previous films, kind of letting them know that, hey, I got some good news. Somebody from McMullen might be joining the cast. Then announcing that Mike McGlone was coming back. And the fans of those films would then tweet back funny lines from She's the One that Mike had said. So, starting to get engaged in the process. And you just... What's that?
Little independent film version of WikiLeaks.
Yeah.
Where you're...
That's exactly it.
But at the same time, you're sort of creating a level of excitement or engagement with everyone, and they're going to tell their friends and
again,
so on.
when I started on it, I had 8,000 followers on Twitter. Not a lot. Now, I'm up to like 50. Again, not a huge number compared to some people, but you only grow.
Right.
Like if you're the kid out of film school and you got 10, if you're actually engaging with those 10 and excited about your process and sharing with them, that 10 will turn into 100, which will turn into 1,000. And hopefully by the time, you're ready to, if you end up just having to post your film on YouTube, maybe you have 2,000 people that actually give a shit. Mm-hmm. And if they do, they may spread the word. And 3 films down the road, you might be looking at, a real sizable audience.
But what we're talking here is grassroots.
Yeah.
It's using technology, but it's really returns to a grassroots.
And it's a cluttered marketplace. And we do, I can say we don't have the dollars to compete against the big films. And the kid making his first film doesn't have the dollars to necessarily compete against me. But, social media, while it hasn't leveled the playing field, it has certainly improved conditions for, indie filmmakers and kids, whether you're, publishing your e-novel, or you're the singer-songwriter who doesn't have a record deal, or the indie filmmaker who doesn't get traditional distribution. It's definitely allowed all of those folks to potentially reach an audience that was unavailable to them 5 years ago.
Right. So speaking of 5 years ago, within this 5 years, you've released now Nice Guy Johnny, Newlyweds, and now the Fitzgerald Family Christmas. And we talked about when Nice Guy Johnny was coming out, you were early on in your enthusiasm about video on demand as well as digital channels for distribution. You were really big on that, and I wonder where your feelings have evolved over the last, let's say, 4 or 5 years.
Well, what I've seen is that everyone else seems to have gotten on board with the idea that digital distribution is the future, that you do not need to make any excuses for releasing your film digitally, either before your theatrical or foregoing theatrical altogether. There isn't the stigma of that's a straight to DVD title.
Right. That's a thing of ancient history.
Ancient history. You never hear that anymore. And the reason is, I remember when we were doing publicity last year for Newlyweds, the folks at Comcast, who are one of the biggest MSOs, and they really push VOD, and especially they push indie VOD, and they've been great to me and some other filmmakers. They said between the year that Nice Guy Johnny came out and Newlyweds, they saw a 75% increase in the number of independent films being rented on VOD. Mm-hmm. So that just gives you an idea that the minute the audience knew that this was available to them, they jumped on it. And I get it, because I was recently home on Long Island, and I was driving from my folks' house through my old neighborhood back into the city. And in a 10-minute ride on one street, Sunrise Highway, there were 2 theaters where Brothers McMullen played back in 1995. Both of those theaters are now closed up and out of business. So that's just an indicator of what's going on all over the country. So we can't make our money theatrically the way you used to be able to, and that's a shame. I'd much rather have my film being seen by everybody in a darkened theater on a huge screen. In the same way that I'm sure every musician would rather we were all pulling out vinyl and putting it on our record player and listening through, big, gorgeous speakers instead of tinny little, MP3. But it's dead and gone. And while theatrical isn't dead and gone, for for a lot of films and a lot of moviegoers, it is dying.
Right. Yeah.
And this is available, and folks seem to enjoy watching the films at home.
And as you've said also in the past, if I can recall correctly, you were introduced to many of the great art films through watching television as a kid, right?
Yeah.
Or a young adult.
Yeah, I mean, it isn't ideal, as we said, but for me, if I look at my 3 favorite films.
The Godfather. I'm going to tell you your 3 favorite films. I don't know the other 2, but I do remember The Godfather.
Yeah. No, Godfather, Annie Hall, Manhattan. Right.
Okay.
3 great films. 3 master filmmakers, and to this day, I've never seen any of those films projected in a theater. And back then, when I first fell in love with them, VHS pan and scan versions. And while not ideal, the storytelling is strong enough and the acting,
right.
and even the cinematography, pan and scan was enough where it was like,
yeah.
I watched them over and over again and fell in love.
Well, sorry to interrupt. The bar wasn't really as raised as high because we weren't already spoiled on digital. It's like the pre-DVD age, the pre-CD age, where everything was remastered. So back then we put up with a whole lot, and we didn't focus on that. But you're right. Essentially, the story has got to be there. Otherwise, you're going to change the channel.
Well, I think my point about bringing that up is it isn't ideal. It's not the ideal way for any filmmaker to have folks see their work. But, we don't live in a utopia, and you have to be willing to say, well, I wish the theaters were still there, and I wish the audience was still excited to go see it. But I also need to stay in business, and I want people to see my movie, and I want as many people as possible to see it. And if this is where they're choosing to see it, then I'm okay with it.
Mm-hmm. Do we know, though, that theatrical in dark theaters was the perfect idea? It's evolving, to get a little bit cerebral about it. But I'm just thinking, it is evolving, and it continues to evolve. We don't know how we'll be watching movies. Who knows? I mean, it may one day evolve into something new.
Well, that's a good point. You wonder back just to think about Shakespeare, which was done sort of like in the round and outside. I think. How would those folks have felt about the idea of it now being done in a darkened theater?
Right.
Would that have been like
with women?
Yeah. How, what is going on? So.
Yeah, with women acting, I meant, because.
Boston, so that means you're a Red Sox fan.
Red Sox, Pats, Celts. Yes.
Now, why would you go and do that and ruin what I thought was a pretty good thing we got going on here?
What makes you think this was a good thing?
I'm a little out of practice, but yeah, it seems like it's going pretty well. You're smiling, I'm laughing.
Yeah. Something tells me you don't laugh very much.
Oh, probably not as much as I used to, I guess.
Well, let's talk also about the film itself, since that's why you're here. So one thing is the title, The Fitzgerald Family Christmas. It's not fair to say it's misleading, but if you look, we're sitting here, I'm looking at the poster, the official poster, and you're wearing an Argyle sweater, and everybody's saying it's almost like a very Brady Christmas. But it's so deceptive because you're watching this, and it's I would say you go deeper in this film, and it's there's less comedy in it. Also, it's a darker film.
Yeah. During the writing of the screenplay, about halfway through, when I got to that scene with the father and he has his reveal, that just came from the writing. That isn't something I had thought I was going to do beforehand. I knew that the dad was going to show up and ask to come back home. And at that point, I had to sort of put the brakes on the screenplay and then think about, all right, what movie do I want to make? Do I want to make a light, breezy, fun family Christmas movie? Or do I want to take this moment and, all right, maybe make a more dramatic film and look at some darker things? And, the idea that this father walked out, if I really examine what that would do to those 7 kids, there are going to be some real wounds there, some deep wounds. And is that the film that want to make. And I quite honestly, I thought about my favorite Christmas film, a holiday film, It's a Wonderful Life. And it's got a great,
Never heard of that one.
Yeah, that's a little known, cult classic. You've got a great blend of comedy and drama, but George Bailey has to go through some very dark shit
Yeah.
in order to get to an earned, heartfelt payoff. So I knew I had a Christmas film. I knew that I was going to have the father get invited back home in that last scene. I knew that I wanted to make a film. I knew that the film, I wanted to make a film that looked at forgiveness. All right. So through the forgiveness, there would be some, that has to come through healing. In order to earn that moment,
Right.
I had to address real wounds. So I went back to the beginning of the script and then said, all right, I've got to rewrite this and tonally not go to my more comfortable space. And that's when I started to rethink some of the subplots and just try and, I guess paint a darker picture.
Well, you could see it in the relationships of the siblings, of which there are 7, that unusual in an Irish family, right? It's all those kids.
Small clan for the
It
Irish.
is small. But that his having abandoned them when they were children certainly has taken its toll in the sense of how distrustful they are of getting too close to one another, that's the disappointment that you deal with, and that is visceral, and we should also add the father who comes back into their lives is played by the great character actor Ed Lauder.
Yeah, who
he's terrific.
Yeah, I mean, I had never met Ed before. Like everyone, the minute you see his face, you're like, oh, I know that guy.
Yeah,
he's
I've
been
seen
in
him
hundreds of movies.
Yeah.
Mike McMullen, who plays one of the brothers, had just worked with Ed in a film. And when Mike was reading the script, he goes, I don't know if you've cast the dad yet, but you really got to sit down with Ed. And Ed and I spoke on the phone. He actually turned out to be from Long Beach, Long Island.
Is that right?
Yeah. So it was a little bit of a no-brainer to bring him in. And a lot of the casting was like that. I mean, with the exception of Ed and Tom Gyrie, every other actor in the film I've worked with before, some of them 3 or 4 times, they've all worked together. And that lent I think like an authenticity, or at least it helped these actors actually feel like a real family, because
Right.
they had real history. Even the fact that Mike and Ed had just worked together before, and Ed and Anita had known one another since the 60s.
What a night. My girlfriend leaves me for my sister's boyfriend, and Dad.
I know, it really hasn't even sunk in yet. He does not seem that sick.
Jerry, we gotta make this happen.
We don't have a say in this.
Did you even talk to Mom?
Yeah, of course I did. All right, and I get both of their point of views, and I'm not taking sides.
My man, you gotta have a horse in this race.
Oh, and you think it should be Dad's?
He deserves to be there.
Does he? This is a guy who walked out on his family.
His life had changed. Overnight, he's practically a millionaire after he sells the company.
I still don't understand how that gives you an excuse to walk out on your wife and kids.
We were only gonna be holding him back. He had a dream. He had to go for it.
Great, so this dream, as you put it, can't involve us?
You say you understand both points of view, do you? He had to make a choice.
Yeah, and he made the wrong choice, clearly.
So he fucked up. He knows it. Give him a break. Think about how heartbreaking this must be for him.
Think about how heartbreaking this must be for Mom, dredging up all these old feelings again. I feel guilty that I even brought it up. I wish I would have just nipped it in the bud, told Dad it's not gonna happen, no shot.
Jerry, you gotta talk to her again.
Okay, it's not up to me. This is Mom's call.
Yeah, no, it was some wonderful character roles there. Anita Gillette, Joyce Van Patten.
She's terrific in the movie, isn't she?
Yeah.
She auditioned for the part of Rosie, and she was so terrific that I had that part of her friend was maybe a 1-scene part, and I said we have to get Joyce into the movie, so I'm gonna flesh that out and give a couple more scenes. And now that scene between Anita Gillette and Joyce, they have that one moment together talking about their respective ex-husbands, is one of my favorite scenes in the movie, and a scene that also One thing I've started to do the last couple of films, which I have fallen in love with, was like not being so precious about the dialogue that I write and allowing these actors, to bring their own voices to it. And to have two 70-year-old women, I said, this is what I'm looking for.
Right.
You guys know how these women talk better than I do.
Yeah.
So run with it. And they came up with some great stuff with that bit about the gun at the end.
Yes.
That was all them.
It was neat. So we should say there is indeed comedy in it. It's not absent of comedy.
Yeah. When I shifted gears and decided to go more dramatic, I know in the past when I've only tried to do 2 dramas really. I think I failed with both of them because they didn't honestly reflect real life. And I think if I try to do anything as a filmmaker, those are the stories I tell. These authentic little character studies that should reflect real life. And
and
real
the
life
characters-
being
right.
heartbreak and despair, but also laughter and levity during the course of any 24 hours.
Yes.
So I knew that I couldn't just strip the piece of all of its comedy. And again, that's one of those things where when you have worked with these actors before and you know what they're capable of and they trust you and you trust them, you can let them play. And in those darker scenes, they would find that little moment, because when any of us, especially, I don't know if it's just true to the Irish, but, the best way to deal with something real is to make fun of it.
Sure. I think the Jews do that too.
Yeah, and I think the Italians as well.
Maybe, yeah. Because you of course, I know Woody Allen is a major influence on you, and you spoke of 2 of your favorites. Mine is Crimes and Misdemeanors, just because you talk about a film that handles the dark side of human nature with comedy also so successfully.
I'd say that and Hannah are the 2 best examples of any filmmaker who's been able to sort of
Get that
juggle
balance.
those tones. Yeah.
It's quite amazing. I do remember what I was going to say before. You could have at any moment done Brothers McMullen 2.
Yeah.
I'm sure it would have been a no-brainer. You have the most of the cast. Why not go that way?
Well, it's funny you say that because I'm going to do it.
Okay. I was setting you up so you say, "Well, I'm not lazy," but that's it. Now I have to say it's not, of course, laziness to do such a thing. But you could have done it sort of with this family in that you mentioned you were returning to
that world.
Your own roots on some level.
Well, again, part of the reason when I made that decision to go with more of a drama with this family was I knew that I wanted to return to the McMullen clan. And that's a little bit more of a lighter and comedic film, even though it's got some drama, but it's definitely on the lighter side. So knowing that I wanted to revisit those characters kind of freed me up to, stay in a more dramatic place with this family. But it's funny, when I saw Clerks 2, that's when I thought about a sequel to McMullen. And then, there's even a rumor they might do a Clerks 3 now. But when I saw Clerks 2, I was like, wow, no one would have ever thought that you do a sequel for a $25,000 indie film. And he did, and it worked, and it was funny as shit. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to start thinking about that. So the initial conversation when I sat down with Mike and Connie about a year before this project, it was to just say, hey, would you guys be up for it? And if so, I'd like to kind of do it for 20 years later. So where do you think our characters might be? And it was from that conversation where, as I was writing this, I started to think, well, why wait till 2015 to work with these guys again? Bring them in now. So the plan is to write the screenplay sometime next year for McMullen 2. You seem disappointed.
No, I'm not. I'm not. I just realized.
That's all right.
Not at all. Not at all. Well, it all begs the conversation. Is a sequel a closing of a story, or is it just a continuation of a story? And, so really everybody's curious. When you have a successful story that really touches people and reaches people, of course, it makes sense to sort of it's delightful to revisit. Yeah.
Well, it's funny when when I thought about it, I was like, all right, of all the characters that I've written about, I actually would be excited to go back in and revisit those characters. And the idea that it's 20 years later,
Shocking.
I know that's scary. I'm curious to I'm curious to see what I do with it as a writer. You know, where it's fun for me to imagine where their lives have gone. I've got a third of it pretty well mapped out, and I'm excited about that. I'm less excited about two of the other brothers that I haven't quite figured out where they are 20 years later.
Maybe I can help you.
How to avoid the thing that you're worried about.
Right. Well, let's just recap, though. The Fitzgerald Family Christmas. Ed Burns is the filmmaker. It stars, oh my goodness, there's so many dimensions. Caitlin Fitzgerald, what a coincidence there. Annette Gillette, Tom Kyrie, Ed Lauder, Michael McGlone from your number of your prior films. Well, almost everybody here, right?
Yep.
Carrie Bichet,
Noah
of course.
Emmerich.
Just on and on. And the great Ed Burns. And it opens...
So it opened on VOD.
VOD on November 21st.
Yeah.
And it will be open theatrically on December 7th, just coming right up.
Yeah.
Here in New York, and I assume in Los Angeles.
We're actually in a handful of markets, so it's going to be pretty exciting to see how it does.
Yeah.
We'll see.
Yeah. Well, I'm certain. The Brothers McMullen will certainly be in theatrical. We'll get a nice theatrical distribution. Everybody will be very excited about that as well.
So.
But go see Fitzgerald Family Christmas. It's a little darker, but there's also, and there I would say your romantic partner in this is you guys have a terrific chemistry, and there's dare I say a maturity to it. I also was pleased by that. It was nice to see.
Yeah, cool.
So thank you very much for coming in and visiting here at Filmwax Radio.
Well, thank you. Always good to see you.
Okay. Thank you, Ed Burns.